I hear Dawkins were words of scientific view. DNA's code unfolding with no purpose inside, it's true. But then I wonder why the fervent debate. Is it just DNA's design or something more at stake? Why do you care? Why do you fight? We're just dancing to the tune of DNA's delight. Oh, my DNA makes me believe, yours makes you deny. Why can't you just let me live my life?
Why would God design a universe with a shape that wasn't geometrically perfect?
Why it took so long, and the idea of the perfect rabbit, the perfect rhinoceros, the perfect horse. In a way, that was a bit silly, because if you were to look at, a population of rabbits is pretty variable. Darwin did it by going via artificial selection. Everybody knew, farmers knew, horticulturalists knew, gardeners knew, you could change a rose, you could change a cabbage by just breeding. And really Darwin's insight was to say you don't actually need a breeder. You don't need a human to do the breeding. Nature does it for you. Survival does it for you. It's not that difficult. It doesn't require any sort of higher mathematics or anything. And yet nobody got it until Darwin and Wallace.
Undeniably, atheism has become prominent in public intellectual discussions, and in many European countries, it seems to be majority or near majorities of people are either directly atheistic or non-religious. And even in America, where it was considered impossible, atheism has got a strong footing. It's a major cultural shift in Western civilization, and Richard Dawkins has been a major figure in promoting it. Not that he's a good philosopher, which has been pointed out by many people who sympathize with him, but he's insistent and he's persistent. And he speaks well, and he talks as if he speaks well in the sense that he's lucid and he's convinced. He describes, I'm going to give a quote from him, about what it means to be an atheist. He says, an atheist in this sense of a philosophical naturalist is somebody who believes there is nothing beyond the natural physical world, no supernatural creative intelligence lurking behind the observable universe, no soul that outlasts the body, and no miracles, except in the case of natural phenomena that we don't yet understand. If there is something that appears to lie beyond the natural world as it is now imperfectly understood, we hope to eventually understand it and embrace it within the natural. It's a definition of what it means to be an atheist from arguably the world's most prominent atheist at the present time. Notice he says the word believes. Of course, when he says believes, he thinks it's largely 99.9 recurring % established by science. But then there are very accomplished scientists who invoke science or bring scientific, what should be considered valid scientific evidence to oppose this theory.
I got to do a deeper dive on the physics that lies behind Krauss's idea that you can explain the universe from nothing. And as I got deeper into the physics, I realized that not only had Krauss not explained the universe from nothing, but that the physics that he had invoked subtly implied the need for a pre-existing mind to account for the origin of the universe. And at that point I realized that the argument for design that I'd made in biology had a perfect counterpart in cosmology and physics, that evidence from biology, physics, and cosmology converge to help us answer the question, what can science tell us about the cause of the ultimate origin of life in the universe, and what can we learn about the identity of the designing intelligence responsible for life in the universe?
It's just a supposition that there's nothing beyond the natural physical world. Dawkins thinks that Darwin removes all doubts that one might have about the existence or non-existence of God and closes any intellectual holes in the materialistic worldview of biology. Another quote from Dawkins, An atheist before Darwin could have said, following Hume, "I have no explanation for biological design. All I know that God is not a good explanation, so we must wait and hope that somebody comes up with a better one." End of imagined quote. Dawkins continues, "I cannot help feeling that such a position, even though logically sound, would have left one feeling pretty unsatisfied, and that although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist." So there we have Dawkins worshipping at the shrine of Charles Darwin. Dawkins wrote that there is a residual gene responsible for religious tendencies, although this is an unproven speculation. See, his idea is that, well, we've evolved and all the psychological tendencies we have are gifted to us by the genes that have evolved to help us survive as humans, to survive and multiply.
Yes, certainly. Already you could preserve your entire genome. I've got my entire genome on one disk. And I once...
Do you have a backup? Just checking. Is it on the cloud? Is it...
The idea was... I don't have a backup. The idea was, it was a television program, and the conceit of the program was it was going to be posted into the family vault, the Dawkins family vault in the church at Chipping Norton.
Oh my gosh.
To be dug up in 1,000 years. And they were...
Like a time capsule.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. And the idea was that in 1,000 years they dig it up, make a duplicate of me. And of course, then we talk about why it wouldn't actually be me, because it would just be an identical twin of me.
How is it that so many people believe in God? What purpose does it serve for the survival and propagation of the human race? What evolutionary purpose does it serve? Dawkins can't explain this within his evolutionary ideological theorizing. So he says that there's a gene which got left over in some people, not in him, that is responsible for religious tendencies. Complete speculation. In a book by Ian Markham called Against Atheism, he writes, Dawkins' hostility to religion is deep-rooted and not grounded in one specific concern. 4 interconnected grounds of hostility may be found throughout his writings. Number 1, a Darwinian worldview makes belief in God unnecessary or impossible. Although hinted at in The Selfish Gene, this idea is developed in detail in The Blind Watchmaker. Number 2, religion makes assertions which are grounded in faith, which represents a retreat from rigorous evidence-based concern for truth. For Dawkins, truth is grounded in explicit proof. Any form of obscurantism or mysticism grounded in faith is to be opposed vigorously. Biological evolutionary theory, there's nothing close to proof that life arises from chemicals. Dawkins, in this sense, is contradicting himself. Continuing, the quote from Ian Markham, third point that Markham has analyzed in the thought of Dawkins, religion offers an impoverished and attenuated vision of the world. The universe presented by organized religion is a poky little medieval universe and extremely limited. In contrast, science offers a bold and brilliant vision of the universe as grand, beautiful, and awe-inspiring. This aesthetic critique of religion is developed especially in his 1998 work, Unweaving the Rainbow. Point number 4, Dawkins. Religion leads to evil. It is like a malignant virus infecting human minds. This is not a strictly scientific judgment in that, as Dawkins often points out, the sciences cannot determine what is good or evil. Quoting Dawkins, science has no methods for deciding what is ethical, unquote. It is, however, a profoundly moral objection to religion, deeply rooted within Western culture and history, which must be taken with the greatest seriousness. What is the objection? That religion leads to evil. This objection is deeply rooted within Western culture. This whole idea of evil is a very Western idea which comes out of Christianity and which comes out of Islam, and it has its roots in ancient Persian ideas, so we're told by scholars. Continuing the quote from Ian Markham, which of these is the real basis for Dawkins' atheism? which are core hypotheses and which auxiliary, to borrow from the language of empiricism. In his own reflections on his intellectual development, Dawkins tends to represent his atheism as arising naturally from his growing conviction of the total explanatory power of Darwinism, a development which began even in his final years at school. But what if Dawkins' atheism is actually grounded in moral considerations and then read back into his scientific empiricism?
The best way to convert people is not necessarily to tell them they're idiots. And I have occasionally seemed guilty of that. For example, I once wrote in the New York Times that anyone who doesn't believe in evolution is either ignorant, stupid, or insane. Now that sounds like an extreme point of view. It's actually a factual point of view, because the word ignorant is not a disparaging word. I'm ignorant of all sorts of things, and so are you, I'm sure. And we would be quite happy to own up to being ignorant of many things, ignorant of music, or ignorant of art, or ignorant of baseball, whatever it might be.
So what we have, Dawkins very aggressively describes religion as organized ignorance, a virus of the mind, a cop-out, a betrayal of the intellect, a betrayal of all that's best about what makes us human, a phony substitute for an explanation which seems to answer the question until you examine it and realize that it does no such thing. Religion, according to Dawkins, religion in science is not just redundant and irrelevant, it's an active and pernicious charlatan that peddles false explanations, or at least pseudo-explanations, where real explanations could have been offered and will be offered. Pseudo-explanations that get in the way of the enterprise of discovering real explanations. As the centuries go by, religion has less and less room to exist and perform its obscuranist interference with the search for truth. In the 21st century, it's high time finally to send it packing. Dawkins' Manifesto. Continuing, I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. Well, there's no doubt Dawkins is clear. He told us in theology that theology is not a real subject. He told him, you're studying something that's not a real subject. In his discussions with Alistair McGrath, who, in terms of scientific degrees, is ahead of Richard Dawkins. Dawkins wouldn't have dared to tell Alistair McGrath, who has degrees in science and theology, that theology is not a real subject. The theology student could have told him, Dawkins, that he is like a blind man saying that art is not a real subject, or a deaf man saying that music is not a real subject. Dawkins' idea of a God gene, it's just clutching at straws. But he does it with such conviction and with the weight of his Oxford professorship behind him that people take him seriously.
We're just puppets on strings of DNA's grand design. Why do we fight? Why do we strive? When it's all just a dance in time. Why do you care? Why do you fight? We're just dancing to the tune of DNA's delight. My DNA makes me believe, yours makes you deny. Why can't you just let me live my life?